this video, we're going to define exactly what a mode is. So mode is one of those terms that has several potential definitions in the music theory world, especially if you're a guitar player. Some people will say that modes are just scales, but that can't be the case, because if modes were just scales, then we wouldn't need the term mode and there wouldn't be all of this confusion. So it has to be something else. Some people will say that modes are about fretboard patterns on the guitar, but that can't be the case either, because you can play modes on a piano, you can play modes on a saxophone, you can sing in different modes, so it can't be just related to fretboard patterns either. So what exactly is a mode? A mode is simply a closed loop that remains unbroken. Think of a chain. It doesn't matter which link you start on. It doesn't matter which link you call home. The chain remains unbroken. You could call this link right here home. You could call this link right here home. You could call this link right here home. It doesn't matter which link you call home. The chain remains intact. All of the links stay connected to each other in the exact order that you see them in. It's just which one are you defining as home, or which one are you defining as one. So until now, most of what you know about modes is probably related to the modes of the major scale. The modes of the major scale are Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. Those are the ones that people tend to talk about the most. But other scales also have modes as well. So in this video, we're not only going to be looking at modes of the major scale, we're also going to be looking at modes of the harmonic minor scale and modes of the melodic minor scale. So in our Western music system, we have exactly 12 notes. 7 of those notes are natural notes. Those are your A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And then the other 5 are notes that can go by either their sharp name or by their flat name. Sharp just simply means 1/2 step higher than. Flat simply means 1/2 step lower than. So the note A sharp is 1/2 step higher than A. The note B flat is 1/2 step lower than B. But A sharp and B flat are technically the same note. They're the same pitch. For all intents and purposes, we could just say they're the same exact note. So this is one thing about music theory that tends to confuse people, because they're used to a regular alphabet where all of the letters only have one name. Well, in the musical alphabet, some of the letters have 2 names. Yes, I know that can be confusing. I know it's not like your normal English alphabet or whatever your native language is, but this is the way that music is. So the sooner that you just accept it and move on, the sooner you can begin to understand all of this stuff. So the thing to understand is that each of these 12 notes are basically equivalent to each other. Yes, they have different names. Yes, they have different pitches. Yes, each note was going to sound different from each other, but from a music theory standpoint, any of these 12 notes can act as your root note, or as your tonic note, or as your one. You could start on any one of these notes, and that could be the start of your scale. So the first scale that you typically learn is going to be the major scale. Now, the major scale has a formula. All scales have formulas. The major scale's formula is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now, this specific formula is talking about the intervals between adjacent notes. So let's say, for example, that we start on the note A. So if I were to start on the note A and then apply the sequence of whole steps and half steps, the major scale formula, my first note would be A. My next note would be a whole step higher, which would be the note B. The next note would be a whole step higher than that, which would be the note C sharp or D flat. The next note would be a half step higher, which is the note D. Then you have a whole step higher, which is E. Then you have a whole step higher, which is F sharp or G flat. And then a whole step higher, which is A flat or G sharp. And then a half step, and you're back at A again. So we just applied that major scale formula, the sequence of whole steps and half steps, starting on A, and this is what we got. So as I said, each of these 12 notes are equally valid starting points. I just happened to start on the note A and then play the major scale formula, and then I got my unique set of 7 notes for the A major scale. I could use any starting point I want to, though. Let's try a different starting point. Let's start on the note B flat or A sharp. So this is going to be our starting note. So a whole step higher than that is C. A whole step higher than that is D. A half step higher than that is the note E flat or D sharp. A whole step higher is F. A whole step higher is G. A whole step higher is A. Half step higher is back at the starting note, B flat or A sharp. So here's that scale. This is now a different, unique set of 7 notes, which were derived by picking a starting note, one of the 12 potential starting notes, applying the major scale formula, and then the result was in this case, it was the B flat major scale. So when we choose the note A as our starting point and then apply the major scale formula, we're left with a unique set of 7 notes that is the A major scale. Now the A major scale has some natural notes in it, and then it has some other notes in it that can either go by sharp names or flat names. For that reason, the A major scale is not always the best scale to explain music theory concepts with. The same is true for the second scale that we just looked at. We looked at the B flat major scale. We started on the note B flat. We then applied the major scale formula, resulting in a unique set of 7 notes that is the B flat major scale. Again, that was a mixture of natural notes and notes that have more than one name. Again, that's not the best scale to explain music theory concepts with. So this is why we typically use the C major scale as the scale to explain music theory concepts, because there's no sharps or flats in the C major scale. If you start on the note C, a whole step higher is the note D, whole step higher is E, half step higher is F, whole step is G, whole step A, whole step B, half step C. So your C major scale has no sharps or flats in it. On the piano, it's just the white keys. That's why piano players, it's just, I don't know, playing C major is arguably easier than playing in other keys on the piano because it's just the white keys. So in order to explain modes of the major scale, we're going to talk about modes of the C major scale. Simply because there's no sharps or flats in the C major scale, it makes explaining music theory concepts easier. Modes is one of those music theory concepts that people tend to have a bit of trouble wrapping their heads around. So let's make it as easy as possible and choose the major scale that has no sharps, no flats, just nice, easy notes. C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. So just one quick thing before we move on, and this is something that you're probably wondering. You're wondering, when do you use sharps and when do you use flats? Well, you just have to follow these 2 rules. When you spell out a major scale, you have to have all 7 letters of the musical alphabet present, and you don't want to mix sharps and flats. So as long as you adhere to those 2 rules, you'll always know whether to use sharp names or flat names when spelling out your major scale. So the first scale we looked at was the A major scale. So we're going with sharp names here. You can see an A, B, C, D, E, F, and G here. We're not mixing sharps and flats. If you were to try to spell out the A major scale using flat names instead of sharp names, you would be violating the rules. You would have an A, you would have a B, and then instead of a C sharp, it would be a D flat, followed by a D. So you can't have a D flat and a D in the same spelling of the major scale, so it violates those rules. So you have to use sharp names. For the next one, we looked at the B flat major scale. It's not the A sharp major scale, it's the B flat major scale. So we had to go with the flat names here. Again, you see all 7 letters of the musical alphabet present, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. There's no mixtures of sharps and flats. If you were to try to use the sharp names here, again, you'd be violating the rules. So we had to use the flat names. But again, all of this stuff about violating rules and sharps and flats, that just throws a curveball into your understanding of the concept at hand. We're trying to understand modes here, so let's just eliminate all sharps and all flats and just choose the easiest of the major scales to study, which is the C major scale. There's no sharps, there's no flats. You don't have to think about any of that stuff. It's just 7 beautiful notes with no sharps and no flats. So again, these are the 7 notes of the C major scale, and these 7 notes were determined by starting on the note C and then applying the major scale formula, which was the intervals between adjacent notes. So this formula right here, which is the intervals between adjacent notes, the sequence of whole steps and half steps, that is the formula that is going to remain unbroken. If you're going to determine what a mode of the C major scale is, then it has to keep this interval chain intact. This is what determines if it is a mode or not. But there's more to modes than just the scale. A lot of people, when they talk about modes, they are only fixated on the scale. They talk about taking a scale and then starting on a different note other than the first note. That's not the full picture. You also have to take into consideration the chords that are derived from the scale for which you are trying to look at the modes of. So we're trying to look at the modes of the C major scale, so we need to look at the chords of the C major scale. So here's your 7 chords of the C major scale in triad form. So all 12 major scales work exactly the same way. When you derive the 7 chords from any of the 12 major scales, you're always going to end up with 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and 1 diminished chord. Right now we're just looking at these chords in their triad form. That's their 3-note form. And the way that you derive these chords is you start on a note and then play every other note until you have 3. So to get your first chord from the C major scale, you start on the C, you play every other note until you have 3. That's your first chord. Your second chord in the C major scale, you start on the second note, play every other note until you have 3. That's your second chord. Your third chord, you start on the third note, you play every other note until you have 3. That's your third chord. You do the same thing with the fourth note. So you do that starting on each of the 7 notes, playing every other note until you have 3. And that's how you get your 7 triads found in the major scale. You can do the exact same thing starting on any one of the 7 notes and playing every other note, but if you do it until you have 4 notes, you're going to derive your 7th chords that are found in the key. 3-note chords are triads, 4-note chords are 7th chords. So in any of the 12 major scales, if you do this process, you're always going to have 2 major 7th chords, 3 minor 7th chords, 1 dominant 7th chord, and 1 half diminished chord, otherwise known as a minor 7 flat 5 chord. All right, so again, the major scale has this scale formula. It's a sequence of whole steps and half steps. I know I keep saying the same thing over and over, but this is super important to understand. This is the scale formula that is going to remain unbroken when you are to look at the modes of the C major scale. Now, the reason I keep bringing this up is because there are 2 different formulas for scales. So the formula that you're looking at right here, this explains the intervals between adjacent notes. Between C and D, you have a whole step. Between D and E, you have a whole step. Between E and F, you have a half step. These are intervals between adjacent notes. Every scale has another scale formula, which is the intervals in relation to the tonic, or intervals in relation to the 1. So the second scale formula for a major scale is the one that you see here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. These numbers have very specific meanings to them. 1, that just means your tonic. That's your home note. In this case, the home note is C. That's the one that we declared to be our starting point. So in a scale formula, whenever you see the number 2, that always means major second. Whenever you see the number 3, that means major third. Whenever you see the number 4, that means perfect fourth. 5 means perfect fifth. 6 means major sixth. 7 means major seventh. I consider this to be the engine. This is the under the hood stuff. This is what makes the major scale sounds like the major scale, as opposed to some other scale, as opposed to the Dorian scale or the harmonic minor scale or the Lydian scale. Every scale has its own specific scale formula of notes with relation to the tonic. That's the second scale formula that we're looking at. And this is what gives the scale in question its particular sound quality. So when we practice scales, we practice them in sequential order like this. But when we actually improvise, when we use the scale as an improvisational framework, we just kind of noodle around in the scale. So I just used all those notes as my improvisational framework, but I was using the C major scale. And that improvisation as a whole had a specific sound to it. The reason it had a specific sound to it, and what's under the hood, the engine that drove that specific sound, is this scale formula that you're looking at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so I was talking about those major seconds and minor seconds and major thirds and all that stuff. You only have 12 possible intervals with relation to the 1. And here they are. So the major scale, as I said, here's your major scale right here. It consists of your 1, and then it's a major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, octave. So this is a nice little chart that can kind of help you hear the sound of what a major second sounds like. So if this is our starting note right here, think of happy birthday. That's the sound of a major second. Think of kumbaya. That's the sound of a major third. So that's the major third right there. Here Comes the Bride is the sound of a perfect fourth. Perfect fifth, that makes the sound of Star Wars. You've probably heard this before. So just the first 2 notes there. That's a perfect fifth. Major sixth, that's the Jingle Bells Dashing Through the Snow part. So that right there, that's a major sixth. And then the Take On Me. So here's the major seventh. And then Somewhere Over the Rainbow. So this is a nice little reference chart just to kind of do some ear training for intervals. So major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major 7th, octave. So that's the scale formula for a major scale. And that is unique to the major scale. That doesn't stay the same for the modes of the major scale because that is not the scale formula. That is the chain that determines the mode. That would be the other scale formula, the intervals between adjacent notes. Alright, so I had to go through all of that explanation for you to fully understand modes. So let's now get into a mode of the C major scale. So here's the second mode of the C major scale. You can see it's the same 7 notes. We just started on the second note, we ran through the scale, and boom, there's the D Dorian scale. The D Dorian scale is a mode of the C major scale. Why? It's because the interval chain has remained unbroken. We just took that little W from the beginning of the C major scale and we plopped it on the end of the Dorian scale, and the interval chain still remains intact. It's an unbroken chain still. We're just taking a different link of the chain and saying, okay, this is now our new 1. You can then derive your 7 chords for the D Dorian scale by doing the exact same process that we did previously. Start on any one of the notes, play every other note until you have 3, and that's how you get your triads. And because the D Dorian scale is a mode of the C major scale, you're going to see that the same 7 chords are present in both instances. Take a look. When you derive the 7 chords from the D Dorian scale, you're left with 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and 1 diminished chord. Those are the same exact 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and 1 diminished chord that is found in the C major scale. That is because the D Dorian scale is a mode of the C major scale. The chain has remained unbroken. You can look at the chords in their 7th form as well, and it's going to be, again, the exact same thing. You're going to have 2 major 7th chords, 3 minor 7th chords, 1 dominant 7th chord, and 1 minor 7 flat 5 chord, otherwise known as a half diminished chord. The exact same 7 chords are found in D Dorian as are found in C major. That is why D Dorian is a mode of the C major scale. It's all the same stuff, just rearranged in a chain-like fashion. Now, just as with the major scale, you have the scale formula that is the intervals between adjacent notes. That's the chain that remains unbroken from mode to mode to mode. That's the scale formula that you're looking at right here. But just like the major scale, you also have that second scale formula. That's each note in relation to the tonic. So for the Dorian scale, it's 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. This is what the D Dorian scale sounds like. That doesn't quite sound like the major scale though, does it? The reason it doesn't sound like the major scale is because I started on the note D and I applied this other scale formula. There's a 1, then there's a major 2nd. Happy birthday. Then you have a minor 3rd though. And then you have a perfect 4th. We already know what that is. It's Here Comes the Bride. Then we have a perfect 5th. That's Star Wars. Then we have a major 6th. That's Dashing Through the Snow. And then we have a flat 7. So that's another one that we didn't have in the major scale either. So, all right. So the fact that it's a different engine driving this scale, the different scale formula, the different intervals in relation to the tonic, that's why the Dorian scale sounds different than the major scale. So again, in practice, we just do this. That's great for practice, but for actually playing, we would do something like... I'm not the best piano player in the world. I'm no Billy Joel, but I'm just noodling around using the D Dorian scale. I'm using just white notes on the piano, but you can hear that my noodling within the D Dorian scale, especially when holding the note D in the bass like this. Alright, so what you heard right there was, again, just me noodling around on the white keys in the piano. Hopefully you can hear the difference between D Dorian noodling, which is just white notes on the piano, versus C major scale noodling, which again is just white notes on the piano. Just to kind of compare the two, I'm going to hold a C note in the bass right here, and then I'm going to just noodle around using white notes on the piano. Alright, just white notes on the piano, just crappy noodling, whatever. Now I want to hold the note D in the bass. I'm just going to use white notes on the piano again. Sounded much different. I was using the exact same set of notes, but it sounded different. So the driver of the bus is this 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. That is what makes the Dorian scale sound like the Dorian scale. That is what makes the Dorian scale sound different than the major scale. So Dorian is the second mode of the major scale. Let's now look at the third mode of the major scale, which is the Phrygian mode. So here's your E Phrygian scale. You can see it's the same 7 notes again. Now we're just starting on the note E, running through the same 7 notes, and the interval chain remains unbroken. We just took that W from the beginning of the Dorian scale and plopped it on the very end, but the chain is still unbroken. We just defined a different 1. That's all we did, a different starting point. And the driver of the bus for the Phrygian scale is 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. So if I wanted to play the E Phrygian scale, which consists of all white notes on the piano, no sharps, no flats, here's the note E. This is what the Phrygian scale sounds like. So if I hold the note E in the bass, and then I noodle around using just white keys, you're going to hear the sound of Phrygian. That did not sound anything like me noodling around in the C major scale. The reason is because of the 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. The intervals at play are, that's your VTEC engine under the hood. Why is the car so fast? Why is it doing that? Well, it's because under the hood we have this 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. Outside, you just have white notes on the piano. You just have E, F, G, A, B, C, D. But under the hood, you have this scale formula. That's what makes Phrygian sound like Phrygian. That's what makes Dorian sound like Dorian. That's what makes the major scale, otherwise known as Ionian scale, sound like the Ionian scale or the major scale. That's the under the hood stuff. Again, you can look at your 7 chords in the E Phrygian scale, doing the same thing. Start on any one note, take every other note until you have 3, you get your triads. It's going to be the exact same 7 chords as found in the C major scale. Why is that? It's because E Phrygian is a mode of the C major scale. It's the third mode of the C major scale. It has all the same stuff. It has the same chords. It has the same notes. It has the same intervals between adjacent notes. It's an unbroken chain. So what you see here is all 7 modes of the C major scale. As I said, the first mode, another name for the major scale, is the Ionian mode. So the first mode of the major scale is the Ionian mode, otherwise just known as just the major scale. But you can look at all of these modes. You can see that the intervals between adjacent notes, that chain remains unbroken. You have your 5 whole steps and your 2 half steps in each of the 7 modal scales that you see here. It's just an unbroken chain. You see the same 7 chords present in all 7 of these modes. You have your 3 major chords, your 3 minor chords, and your 1 diminished chord. There's no other notes being used here except for just your A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Just the natural notes, no sharps, no flats. That's what makes these modes. But the driver of the bus for each of these modes is what determines the sound. So for the Ionian mode, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. For the Dorian mode, the 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. Phrygian mode, 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, and so on. So all of these could potentially act as keys for which you could play music in and write chord progressions and write solos and write songs and vocal lines and all kinds of stuff. But in Western music, the 2 most common ones are the Ionian mode and the Aeolian mode. In Western music, instead of saying the C Ionian mode, or instead of calling a chord progression an Ionian chord progression, we just call it the key of C major. Also in Western music, the 6th mode, which is the Aeolian mode, that is typically just referred to as a minor key, We don't call it the Aeolian mode in modern day. Actually, we do, because guitarists are constantly arguing about modes and obsessing over modes. So, we do still use these modal terms. But for the most part, people are just concerned with the first mode of a major scale and the sixth mode of a major scale, the Ionian mode and the Aeolian mode, otherwise known as the major key and a minor key. A major key is just simply the Ionian mode. You can look at your major scale. You can look at your chords derived from that major scale. You can write music in the major scale. There's a song written in the C major scale, otherwise known as the C Ionian mode. You can also write music in the Aeolian mode, the sixth mode of the major scale. This is just called the key of A minor in Western music. Sounds something like this. Just a little chord progression, which, now I'm writing in A minor. I'm using just white keys. My tonal center is the A minor chord, so it's just a mode of the C major scale. It's not really a new key. I'm just using the white keys. But in Western music, they call that a different key. So these two modes, they're so popular in Western music. The Ionian mode is so popular and the Aeolian mode is so popular that it's called the key of C major and the key of A minor. This is why I'm always fighting for the whole 12 key argument. I'm going to say, why are you going to say that the key of A minor is a completely different key? Why don't you just say the key of A minor is just a mode of the C major scale, because that's what it is. The Dorian mode is just as much of a valid perspective. Why doesn't that get to be called a key? Let's write some music in the Dorian mode. I'm going to write some music in the D Dorian mode right now. I'm only going to use white keys on the piano. I'm only going to use chords that are shown here. The 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and the diminished chord. I'm not going to use them all. You don't have to use them all. But I'm only going to be using from this pool of stuff. It's just that the D minor chord is going to be my tonal center. Here's the D minor chord. All right, so let me just write a little song. So. Alright, so I just played some music in the D Dorian mode right there. I only used white keys on the piano. I only used 4 chords. I used the D minor chord, I used the C major chord, I used the G major chord, I used an F major chord. All chords that were found right in this D Dorian mode. Why does that not get the same privilege as getting to be called a key? The Aeolian mode gets that privilege. The Ionian mode gets that privilege. Why doesn't Dorian get that privilege? Why doesn't Phrygian get that privilege? Why doesn't Lydian get that privilege? This is my big issue, and this is why I'm constantly pushing for the 12 key model. The 12 key model simply states that you have your 12 major scales. The major scales are what determines the key. And then for each of the 12 major scales, you have 7 perspectives, aka 7 modes. What is typically referred to as a minor key in Western music is simply just the Aeolian mode. It's just one of the possible perspectives. So there's just one thing I should point out, and that's the Locrian mode. So I say that the major scale has 7 possible perspectives for which you can treat as keys and write music in and write chord progressions in. When it comes to the Locrian mode, that's a little difficult. I'm not going to say it's impossible. I'm just saying that the Locrian mode is the one mode that's based off making the diminished chord of the key to be your 1. So it's not always easy to take a diminished chord and make that feel like home or feel like your tonal center. Let's try to write some music in Locrian right now. Here's the B diminished triad right here. So I guess if I was to write music in Locrian, it would sound something like that. As I said, it's not super easy to make a diminished chord feel like your tonal center or to feel like home. I was really trying to force that there, but it's just, it's not as easy. It's much easier to make a major chord to feel like your tonal center or a minor chord to feel like your tonal center. You can write great music in Mixolydian. You can write great music in Dorian. You can write great music in Phrygian. You have all of these other perspectives. That's why I say that there's just 12 keys, and each key has 7 perspectives with that weird Locrian thing. So each key may have 6 perspectives and then Locrian 2. All right, so we have 12 potential starting notes. From each of those potential starting notes, you could then play the major scale, which results in 12 possible major scales. For any of the 12 possible major scales, each major scale has 7 modes. So we just looked at the modes of the C major scale. The C major scale has 7 modes. We could have worked through the exact same process for the D major scale, which also has 7 modes. We could have worked through the same process for the E major scale, which also has 7 modes. All of the major scales work exactly the same way. We just chose to use the C major scale simply because that's the one major scale that doesn't have any sharps or flats, and therefore when it comes to discussing music theory and looking at how modes work and stuff like that, it's just visually easy to see what's going on. I mean, you could use the B major scale and do all of the exact same stuff if you want. The B major scale is a scale that has 5 sharps in it. You can then derive the 7 modes of the B major scale if you wanted to. But as you're doing that, you're going to have 5 sharps that you're dealing with, and that's just going to add to the confusion. If you're already struggling to understand modes and what modes are and the intervals that are happening within each modal scale, if you're already trying to learn all that stuff, you don't need all this extra sharp business on top of it, kind of further confusing you. That's the only reason we use the C major scale. But all 12 major scales, exactly the same. They all work exactly the same way. So the next scale we're going to look at is the harmonic minor scale. So the harmonic minor scale is not a mode of the major scale. The harmonic minor scale is a completely different set of intervals between adjacent notes. It is a different interval chain. So you still have 12 notes for which you can start on and then apply the scale formula, resulting in the harmonic minor scale. And then looking at the harmonic minor scale, you can then rearrange the notes of that to get 7 modes of that. But just understand that we're now dealing with a new sequence of intervals between adjacent notes. So let's look at what this harmonic minor scale is and where it comes from. So the harmonic minor scale is the result of making a slight change to the natural minor scale. Now, the natural minor scale is also known as the Aeolian scale. And if you recall, the Aeolian scale is simply just a mode of the major scale. And the reason it's a mode of the major scale is because this scale formula right here is still the same chain of whole steps and half steps, the intervals between adjacent notes, as that of the major scale. It's just a rearrangement. The Aeolian mode is the 6th mode of the major scale. So what you see here, the sequence of whole steps and half steps, this is just one of the potential rearrangements of the major scale, keeping the chain intact. Now, you can start on any one of these 12 notes and you can apply this sequence of whole steps and half steps, and the result is going to be the natural minor scale. You can have the A natural minor scale, or the A sharp natural minor scale, or the B natural minor scale, or the C natural minor scale. There's 12 potential natural minor scales for which you could have, depending on which note you start on. We're just going to start on the note A, because when you do that, and then you apply the sequence of whole steps and half steps, you're going to end up with a nice, pretty 7 notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Beautiful. No sharps, no flats. So from this natural minor scale, if you look at the 7th note, which is a G, and you raise that by 1/2 step to a G sharp, and there's your A harmonic minor scale. Very simple. One single note difference from that of the natural minor scale. But that one single note difference, that one single note that was raised by 1/2 step, that changes the entire interval chain of adjacent notes. So the 2 big changes happen right here. So you have a whole half step interval. That's the interval between the F and the G sharp, or the 6th note and the 7th note. Whole half means 3 half steps, or 3 semitones. And then between G sharp and then the A, which is back at the starting note, there's only a half step interval now. So this is a different interval chain, a different set of intervals between adjacent notes. So for this reason, the harmonic minor scale is not a mode of the major scale. The harmonic minor scale is not a mode of the natural minor scale. The harmonic minor scale is a new thing. It's a new sequence of intervals between adjacent notes. Here's what the A natural minor scale sounds like. And here's what the A harmonic minor scale sounds like. So that right there, just that one note changes everything. So you can now take this harmonic minor scale and you can derive 7 modes for it. But before we do that, we first have to acknowledge the fact that there's 2 different scale formulas at play. The first scale formula is the intervals between adjacent notes. That's the chain that remains unbroken when you're looking at the modes of the harmonic minor scale. The second scale formula, that's the driver of the bus. That's the under the hood stuff. That's what gives the harmonic minor scale the sound of the harmonic minor scale. So you have your 1. We'll start here. Here's your A. You have your major second. You have your minor third. You can think of smoke on the water. So minor third. Perfect fourth. Here comes the bride. Perfect fifth. That's Star Wars. And then we have a minor sixth. Not a major sixth. It's a minor sixth. Very sad sounding interval. And then you have your major seventh interval. That's that Take On Me. So major second, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor sixth, major seventh, octave. So just as we did with the major scale, and just as we did with the modes of the major scale, you can write out your 7-note scale, and then you can derive chords from it. You start on any one of the 7 notes, play every other note until you have 3, and that's how you get your triads. So here's our A harmonic minor scale. So those are the 7 notes that we're going to be using to play every other note. So starting on the A, playing every other note, it's an A minor chord. Starting on B, playing every other note, it's a B diminished triad. Starting on C, playing every other note, it's an augmented triad. Starting on D and playing every other note, you get a minor triad. Starting on E and playing every other note, you get a major triad. Start on F, play every other note, major. Start on G sharp, play every other note, you get a diminished. And then back at the... So there's your 7 triads found in the harmonic minor scale. So you can do the same exact thing, but you can do 4 notes at a time to get your 7th chords from this scale. So your first chord is going to be like this. That's called a minor major 7th chord. Your next chord is going to be that half diminished chord. Your next chord is going to be a major 7 sharp 5 chord. The sharp 5 always lets you know that's an augmented. Anytime you see sharp 5 in a chord symbol, that lets you know it's an augmented chord of some sort. And then you have a D minor 7. And then you have a E dominant 7. Then you have a F major 7. Then you have a G sharp fully diminished. And then you're back at your A minor major 7. Alright, so this scale and then the 7 chords that are derived from the scale, you could say that this is the first mode of the harmonic minor scale. So the second mode of the harmonic minor scale is called the B Locrian 6 mode. Now, all these modes of the harmonic minor scale and the melodic minor scale, they're all going to be slight deviations from the major scale modes. You're going to see the words Dorian coming up a lot, Phrygian and Lydian and Mixolydian. You're going to see all those the same terms that are used for the major scale modes, you're going to see all those terms coming up again when looking at the modes of the harmonic minor scale and the melodic minor scale. That's why it's a really good idea to study the crap out of the major scale. And then if you're going to study modes, start with the major scale modes, study them really, really well. Know the scale formulas really, really well, because if you know that the Locrian scale formula is 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, flat 5, flat 6, flat 7, and then you see this Locrian 6 thing, that's just saying, oh, okay, I take the Locrian scale and then I just put a natural 6 in there. It's not a flat 6, it's just a natural 6. That's what that 6 means. So if you know your major scale modes really well and you know the scale formulas really well, then you can just look at the names of these harmonic and melodic minor scale modes and make the alterations that are necessary. As we go through this, you're going to see what I'm talking about. So anyway, so this is called the B Locrian 6 scale. This is the second mode of the harmonic minor scale. The reason it sounds like it does is because it has a specific scale formula, the 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, flat 5, natural 6, flat 7. And the reason that it's a mode of the harmonic minor scale is because the interval chain of whole, half, and whole half steps remains unbroken. It's just kind of rearranged from that of the harmonic minor scale. You can go ahead and you can derive your chords, and they're going to be the exact same 7 chords as found in the A harmonic minor scale. It's because B Locrian 6 is the second mode of the A harmonic minor scale. The same 7 chords are found in B Locrian 6 as are found in A harmonic minor. That applies to the triads, that applies to the 7th chords. The exact same stuff is found in B Locrian 6 as is found in A harmonic minor because they are modes of each other. Here are all 7 modes of the A harmonic minor scale. As you can see, the only 7 notes that are at play are A, B, C, D, E, F, and G sharp. There's no additional sharps, there's no additional flats, it's just those 7 notes. The same 7 chords are used in all of these modes. Just a little rearrangement each time, but the driver of the bus is the scale formula with relation to the tonic. So these are the 7 modes of the A harmonic minor scale. Remember, there's 12 potential starting notes, so that means that there's 12 potential harmonic minor scales. We just looked at the A harmonic minor scale because that's the one that's the easiest, that has the least amount of sharps in it. All right, so finally we're going to look at the modes of the melodic minor scale. So again, you have 12 potential starting notes, which means that you have 12 potential melodic minor scales, each of which has 7 modes. Again, we're going to start with the A natural minor scale because that's the one that doesn't have any sharps or flats in it. So from the natural minor scale, you get the melodic minor scale by raising the 6th and 7th notes. In this case, the 6th and 7th notes are F and G. So you're now going to be left with A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp. And again, this is not a mode of the natural minor scale. It is also not a mode of the major scale. It is also not a mode of the harmonic minor scale because of this. The intervals between adjacent notes is a different chain than all of the rest of the scales that we've looked at so far. As you can see, you have a whole, then you have a half, and then you have 4 whole steps in a row, and then you have another half. That's the chain for the melodic minor scale that is going to remain unbroken for all of its modes. And then of course you have your under the hood stuff that gives the melodic minor scale its particular sound, and that's the 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the intervals with relation to the tonic. So if here's your note A. So here's the A melodic minor scale. So the melodic minor scale is basically the same thing as the major scale, but it has a minor third, otherwise known as a flattened third. So here's your A major scale. Here's the melodic minor scale. We're just lowering the third note. So that's the melodic minor scale. That's the driver of the bus, is that scale formula with the intervals in relation to the tonic. That's what makes it sound the way it does. And just like with any other scale, you can derive your triads by starting on a note, playing every other note until you have 3. If you do that, you have 2 minor chords, an augmented chord, 2 major chords, 2 diminished chords. That looks nice and tidy. I just like the way that looks. Everything's so neat and organized. It's very satisfying. Looking at things in 7th form, that's your 4-note chords. So you have a minor, major 7th chord, you have a minor 7th chord, you have an augmented chord, or in 7th form, it's a major 7th sharp 5 chord. You then have 2 dominant 7th chords. You then have 2 half diminished chords. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right to the 7 modes of the A melodic minor scale. As you can see, all the 7 chords remain exactly the same for all 7 modes. It's just rearranged. The interval chain remains the same for all 7 modes. The same 7 notes are exactly the same. You have A, B, C, D, E. You have that F sharp and that G sharp. Those are your only 2 sharp notes at play. And just as with the harmonic minor scale, the names of these modes give you an idea of what's happening within the scale formula. So, for example, if you know what your Mixolydian scale formula is, your Mixolydian scale formula, it's one of the modes of the major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. Well, Mixolydian flat 6 is the Mixolydian scale, but with a flat 6. Or if you know your Aeolian scale formula, 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, then you know an Aeolian flat 5 is the same thing, but just with a flat 5. This is also sometimes referred to as the Locrian natural 2 mode, because the Locrian scale formula is 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, flat 5, flat 6, flat 7, but this has a natural 2 in it. So this could be referred to as Aeolian flat 5. This could also be referred to as Locrian natural 2. So there's a couple different names for some of these modes, but the important thing is that you understand what a mode is. A mode is just a rearrangement of the original scale, maintaining all the same 7 chords and the same interval between adjacent notes structure. And then finally, you'll see that the 7th mode is also known as the G sharp super Locrian mode. So the 7th mode of the harmonic minor scale is also known as the super Locrian, but there's a slight difference because the 7th mode of melodic minor has a flat 7, whereas the 7th mode of harmonic minor has a double flatted 7. So sometimes people will call the 7th mode of the harmonic minor scale the super Locrian double flat 7 mode, whereas they'll call the 7th mode of the melodic minor just the super Locrian mode. This is also known as the altered scale. Alright, so that's going to do it for this lesson. Hopefully it didn't hurt your brain too much. If it didn't, then it's awesome. It hurt my brain making it, that's for sure. Just the important thing to understand is that modes are simply just rearrangements of their initial parent scale. You can start with the major scale, you can rearrange things, and you're going to be left with the same notes. You're going to be left with the same interval between adjacent note chain. You're going to be left with the same chords. The reason that it sounds different is because of the other scale formula, which is the notes in relation to the tonic. That's what makes one modal scale sound different from the next modal scale from the next modal scale. But the reason it's a mode is because all of the stuff is the same. All of the notes are the same, and the chain is the same, and the chords are the same. All right, so yeah, we looked at major scale modes, we looked at harmonic minor scale modes, we looked at melodic minor scale modes, and there's other scales out there too that also have modes as well. We only looked at these 3 today. Maybe in a future video we'll look at some other ones, but I think this will keep you busy for a while. So thank you for watching. Any questions or comments, feel free to ask. See you next time.